My name is Celeste Warner, and I wasn't supposed to be at the will reading that morning. The truth is, I hadn't heard from anyone in my family since the last Thanksgiving, the one where I showed up with a homemade pie and left before dessert because no one remembered to make a seat for me. Even my father, always composed and proper, had barely looked up from his phone when I said goodbye. So when I received the formal letter from my late grandfather's estate, I thought it was a mistake. He had been the only one who ever saw me. Not just tolerated me, saw me. As a child, when the rest of the family gathered around my cousin Brett and his awards, Grandpa Ed would pull me aside and ask about the books I was reading. When Brett was off racing dirt bikes or bragging about stock tips, Grandpa Ed gave me his old fountain pen and said, "For the girl who listens more than she speaks, you'll write something that matters one day." And then he died. And everything else, my place in the family, my name in their story, seemed to vanish with him. Still, something told me to show up. The room was quiet when I walked in. Mahogany walls, thick drapes, the kind of place built to make people like me feel small. My mother blinked when she saw me, as if she were surprised I had the address right. Brett smirked. Aunt Valerie just sipped her tea. I nodded politely and took the seat furthest from the head of the table. The attorney began reading the will. It was structured and precise, just like Grandpa. Donations to the museum. A scholarship fund for kids from his hometown. And then came the section I hadn't expected to hear. To my granddaughter, Celeste Warner, I leave the lake house in its entirety, and all contents therein, including journals, letters, and any remaining personal items of sentimental value. I looked up. My mother's face flushed red. Brett straightened in his seat like someone had just cut his mic. The lake house. The place where Grandpa taught me how to skip stones, how to build a fire, how to listen to silence and hear something in it. It wasn't just a property. It was him. Then the attorney continued. It is my express wish that the house remain with Celeste, and that it not be sold, reassigned, or redistributed by any other party in the family. I blinked. And that's when my mother interrupted. She gave that up years ago. She hasn't been around. Surely, this is a clerical mix-up. The attorney shook his head. Mr. Warner updated this clause 3 months before his passing. My hands trembled in my lap. It was the first time in years I had felt chosen, seen, loved, even after death. But my relief was short-lived. Because 2 weeks later, when I drove up to the lake house with the keys in hand, I found a sold sign in the driveway. And a moving truck in the back. Standing in the doorway, clipboard in hand, smug as ever, was Brett. "This must be awkward," he said, not even pretending to be surprised. "They sold it to me last week. You know, after they figured you weren't really going to keep it." I didn't speak. Not yet. But in that moment, as the wind whipped through the pine trees behind him, I made a quiet vow. You don't steal from the girl who listens. Because she never forgets. And she always finds a way to reclaim what was hers. The day I lost the lake house, something inside me hardened, not with anger, but with clarity. I had always believed that if I just stayed kind, stayed quiet, the truth would eventually rise. That someday, someone would see how I never asked for much, how I stepped aside again and again while Brett took everything. But now I understood. This wasn't about being overlooked. It was about being erased. And the people doing the erasing? They shared my blood. I sat in my car for almost an hour after Brett closed the front door behind him. I watched the movers walk in and out of what should have been mine, each box like a confirmation that they thought I wouldn't fight back. But I wasn't the girl who brought pie and left early anymore. That night, I drove back to my one-bedroom apartment in Raleigh and pulled out the box Grandpa Ed had once handed me when I turned 18. It was old, cedar-lined, and still smelled faintly of tobacco and pine. Inside were his letters, dozens of them. Handwritten, thoughtful. Some dated, some not. Some were reflections on life. Others were stories about people in the family, things they'd done, secrets they thought no one knew. And one letter was addressed to me. Celeste, if you're reading this, I'm likely gone, but that doesn't mean I'm done protecting you. You have more strength than you believe and more vision than this family deserves. If they ever try to take what's yours, remember. There's more than one way to reclaim a legacy. Don't fight like them. Build. Smarter. Quieter. Better. I read that paragraph over and over until my tears dried. And that's when the plan began to form. I didn't want revenge through fire or lawsuits. I wanted them to see me thrive. I wanted them to realize what they gave away when they dismissed me. I'd spent years doing freelance work for small design firms. I'd helped launch marketing campaigns that exploded on social media but never had my name on them. I had the skills, I just never used them for myself. Now I would. I started with one idea: a boutique agency for legacy storytelling, helping small families and aging entrepreneurs document their lives, organize their estates, and protect their history, the exact thing my family never did for me. It started with a single client, an elderly couple who owned a honey farm and wanted to leave a digital legacy for their grandchildren. I built a brand, redesigned their packaging, helped them land a local news feature. They cried during the reveal. So did I, because I was building something of my own. And I hadn't even used the Warner name once. For months, I disappeared. Not in the tragic sense, not hiding or sulking, but in the way people vanish when they're finally building something that matters. I stopped responding to holiday texts, skipped every family dinner, removed myself from the group chat with its one-sided announcements and passive-aggressive updates. I replaced it all with motion. By the end of the second quarter, my new agency, Root Thread, had 6 clients. 2 of them were referrals. One was a retired music producer from Atlanta who told me, "You're the first person who's ever made my story feel like it meant something." That one stuck with me. But the real shift came when I got a message from the county office. I had placed a flag months earlier on any real estate filings involving the Warner Trust, purely for curiosity, I told myself. But when the alert came through, it showed something unexpected. Brett Warner submitted for small business rezoning near Echo Ridge Lakefront, adjacent to Parcel 64. Parcel 64 was the lake house. And adjacent to it? The small plot Grandpa had used as a garden shed. A narrow strip no one ever paid attention to. Except me. Because years ago, while helping him organize old deeds, I noticed something odd. That thin strip wasn't part of the house deed. It was separate. A different parcel, owned outright and not by the trust. It was in my name. Grandpa had transferred it to me quietly when I was 19, and no one ever noticed. I never thought much of it either, until now. Brett's development plan needed that land. And I owned it. I took a deep breath, heart pounding, and called a lawyer. A real one this time, not a friend, not a favor. I hired a woman named Nadine Shore, sharp and seasoned, with the kind of voice that made grown men second-guess themselves. She reviewed the documents and raised an eyebrow. "Well," she said, tapping her pen against the file. "Looks like someone built their sandcastle half on your beach. Can I stop it?" I asked. She smiled. "Not only can you stop it, you can own the tide." That night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights flickering outside, holding a blueprint of Brett's precious redevelopment plan. He thought he had outplayed me. He thought he erased me from the story. But what he didn't know is that Grandpa had left me more than memories. He had left me the one thread that would unravel everything. And I was about to pull it slowly, deliberately, and in full view of everyone who thought I'd stay quiet forever. I wasn't interested in destroying Brett's project. Not yet. What I wanted was far more satisfying leverage. So I did what Grandpa had always taught me to do when the stakes were high. I waited. I watched. And then I wrote a letter so polite it could cut glass. It was addressed to Brett. "Dear Mr. Warner, I understand you filed for rezoning adjacent to Parcel 64, which, as of record, is titled under my name. I'd be happy to discuss usage terms or alternate solutions if contacted before the 15th of next month. Respectfully, Celeste Warner." No anger. No accusation. Just the unmistakable undertone of power, because now he needed something from me. 2 weeks passed before I got a reply. And when it came, it wasn't a letter. It was a knock at my office door. I opened it to find Brett in a tailored blazer, holding a branded coffee and wearing that same smirk I remembered from every childhood competition. "Didn't expect you to actually follow through," he said, strolling and uninvited. "I usually don't announce my moves," I replied, motioning to the chair across from my desk. "But this one's different." He sat and placed the coffee on my desk like an offering. "I don't think you realize what this project means," he began. "It's bigger than a garden plot. There's a resort deal in the works, investors, timelines. You can't hold it up over some sentimental footpath Grandpa left you." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "You mean this sentimental footpath you didn't know I owned until your plans landed in the public record?" His jaw tightened. "Just slightly." "Look," he said, forcing a smile. "I'll buy it. Double the value. Triple." I paused. "No." He blinked. "Excuse me. I'm not selling, but I'm open to terms." He leaned forward. "What kind of terms?" I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposed licensing agreement, strict usage rights, annual fees, a percentage of any commercial profit gained from use of my land, and a mandatory plaque that would stand at the edge of the property reading, "This project exists with the permission of Celeste Warner, rightful heir to Parcel 64. It was subtle, petty even, but it was everything he hated. He laughed. "You're not serious." I met his eyes. "Oh, I'm completely serious." He stared at the folder like it had insulted his ancestors. "I'll have my lawyer look it over," he said finally. "Do that," I replied. "But remember, every day you wait, your investors lose faith." He left in silence. And I stood by the window, watching him walk back to his expensive car, knowing the balance had finally shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to the family's choices. I was creating the terms. I expected Brett to come back with lawyers. What I didn't expect was the phone call from my mother. "Celeste, darling, we should talk." It had been over a year since she last called me anything other than dramatic or distant. Her voice was smooth, careful, almost rehearsed, the kind of tone people use when they're about to ask for something, but want to make it sound like a gift. I let her speak. "I just heard about this little situation with Brett," she said lightly. "We're all family, sweetie. Surely there's a way to work this out without all these legal theatrics." Theatrics. Funny how that word only shows up when I start defending myself. "What exactly do you want, Mom?" I asked. A pause. She exhaled slowly. "I think it would be a beautiful gesture if you let it go. Let Brett build something meaningful. Your grandfather wouldn't want you to cause division." I almost laughed. "No. He just didn't want you to steal what he left me." Again. That shut her up for a beat. She tried again. "Celeste, be reasonable." "Being reasonable is how you all walked all over me for 2 decades, I replied. "Now I'm just being exact." I hung up. And that night, I went over every clause of the agreement Nadine and I had drafted. We added protections, enforced branding restrictions, tied any breach of terms to automatic forfeiture of rights. If they wanted that land, if they wanted to use even 1 square foot of my inherited soil, they'd do it on my terms, with my name carved into the very foundation of what they built. By the following week, Brett's attorney reached out. They had concerns, of course, mostly around the plaque and the percentage cuts. But they also submitted a new draft for review. And at the bottom of page 6, something caught my eye. Partner 2, Celeste Warner. I blinked. They weren't trying to just lease the land anymore. They were asking me to become a silent stakeholder. A token seat at the table and appeasement. But I saw it for what it really was. Proof that they needed me. Proof that their project would not exist without my name in ink. It was tempting to reject it, to throw it back and walk away. But I didn't. Instead, I rewrote the partnership clause myself and sent it back with 1 line bolded at the top. Her name was on the contract before yours ever mattered. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for a crisp Saturday morning in early October. The kind of day my mother used to call family photo weather, blue skies, clean breeze, no excuses. Brett had invited the local press. A drone hovered overhead. They even had branded hard hats and gold-plated shovels. But none of that mattered to me. Because as the speeches began, as Brett smiled and charmed and spun tales about legacy and vision, I stood just off to the side, not speaking, not clapping, but watching. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to see. The land that was once mine stolen, then reclaimed, was now covered in red ribbon and media banners. And yet, as Brett turned to introduce the key stakeholders, as he listed the family names one by one, something strange happened. He hesitated, then cleared his throat. And of course, a special thanks to Ms. Celeste Warner, without whom this project would quite literally not exist. A few heads turned, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of awareness ripple through the crowd. My mother, standing near the back in her pearls and perfect posture, shifted uncomfortably. She hadn't been expecting me to attend. And she certainly hadn't expected to hear my name spoken as the foundation for their dream. After the speeches, while everyone moved toward the champagne table, she found me. "You could have stayed home," she said under her breath. I didn't look at her. But then who would remind them whose name is on the deed? She narrowed her eyes, but her voice stayed level. "I don't know what you think you've accomplished, Celeste. This little stake you've secured, it's not power. It's pity. They're tolerating you." I turned to face her fully. "No, they tolerated me my entire life. This," I gestured toward the scaffolding and the applause still echoing from the podium, "this is different. Now they respect me, even if they hate that they have to." She said nothing. And then, something I didn't expect, her hand trembled. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A crack in the armor. Because for the first time in her life, she couldn't control the narrative. Not with smiles. Not with guilt. Not even with blood. I had written my name into the structure of their future, and there was nothing she could do to erase it. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, and embossed with a gold crest I hadn't seen since childhood. The Warner family reunion. I nearly laughed. After everything, the will reading, the land dispute, the reluctant partnership, now they wanted a reunion. A public show of unity, no doubt. The kind of event that allowed them to pretend everything was as it used to be, only prettier, more curated. The RSVP deadline was handwritten in delicate script. I didn't reply, but I didn't throw it away either. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. The caller ID read, Camilla Warner. I hadn't spoken to my cousin in years. Not since she'd told me, at age 24, that I wasn't cut out for leadership because I took things too personally. I answered with caution. "Celeste," she said warmly, too warmly, "we really hope you'll come. Everyone's asking about you." "Are they?" I said. "Or are they asking how I ended up on the contract they all thought Brett owned outright?" A beat of silence. "Look," she said, dropping the sweet tone. "I get it. You've made your point. But this reunion, it's not about business. It's about healing. About family. Healing. That word again. Always wielded by the people who did the damage. Still, something in me stirred. Not out of guilt, but curiosity. What did they really want? What would they do if I showed up not as the black sheep, but as the one they now needed? "I'll come," I said at last. "But only if I sit at the head table." Another pause. "Of course." The reunion was held at a lakeside banquet hall, just a few miles from the land they'd tried to take from me. The air was filled with old jazz, aging smiles, and the scent of catered politeness. When I walked in, heads turned. I wore black. Sleek. Modern. Minimal. No apologies. Brett was already seated. My mother stiffened when she saw me. My aunt did a double take. Even Camilla blinked twice before offering a stiff smile. I took my place at the head table, no hesitation, no pretense. The speeches began shortly after dinner. Camilla went first, followed by Brett, each one talking about family strength and our proud legacy. I watched them, these experts of curated truth. And then Camilla announced, "We'd like to offer a few words from our surprise guest, Celeste." I stood slowly. And for a moment, the only sound was silverware pausing midair. "I wasn't supposed to be part of this table," I said evenly. Or any table, really. I was supposed to watch from the sidelines, grateful just to be near the family that told me success looked like someone else's reflection. A quiet swept through the room. "But legacy," I continued, "isn't what you inherit. It's what you defend. What you build when no one's clapping. And it turns out, when you stop asking for a seat, you start building the house instead." I looked down the table at the ones who doubted, dismissed, rewritten me. Then I smiled. Enjoy the view. After the reunion, the messages started. First came an email from an old neighbor, someone I barely remembered as a kid, congratulating me on showing them how it's done. Then came 2 inquiries from small business owners who'd seen the article in the Regional Business Journal about the land dispute I'd quietly and brilliantly navigated. Apparently, word traveled fast in small towns when a girl once branded a burden stood up and made herself the cornerstone. But the message that stuck with me came late one evening, just as I was packing up for the night. It was from Nina, Grandpa Ed's longtime caretaker. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She was one of the few adults in my childhood who treated me with tenderness. She'd braid my hair when no one else noticed I was crying. She'd leave books on my nightstand, the kind my cousins called boring, but that made me feel alive. The message was short. I still have something he meant for you to have. Been waiting until the time was right. If you're ready, stop by the old place tomorrow. The next morning, I drove to the edge of town. The lake shimmered like a secret, and the air smelled of pine and memory. Nina opened the door before I knocked. She was older, her hair streaked with gray now, but her eyes, kind and knowing, were exactly the same. He knew you'd come back, she said simply. She led me to the attic of the caretaker's cottage, the one behind the lake house Brett had tried to develop. There, beneath a loose floorboard, she pulled out a wooden box, familiar in design but larger than the one I already had. Inside were documents, letters, maps, blueprints, and at the bottom, a single envelope in Grandpa's handwriting. For Celeste, when she knows who she is. My hands trembled as I opened it. They'll spend their lives chasing applause. You'll find power in silence. Don't worry about building bigger, just build truer. You were never meant to follow their path. You were meant to design your own. A wave of something I couldn't name washed over me, grief, maybe. Or closure. Or perhaps it was a kind of homecoming no house could offer. I looked up at Nina. Why didn't you send this before? She smiled softly. Because he told me you'd come back not when you were angry, but when you were ready. And I was. 6 months after the reunion, I was invited to speak at a regional business forum, a modest event hosted by a women-led entrepreneur network in Charlotte. I almost declined. I wasn't interested in applause or panels or being the face of anything. But then I saw the speaker list. And there he was, Brett Warner, keynote presenter. The topic? Generational legacy and family business. I said yes. The day of the event, I arrived early, dressed in slate gray, minimalist, and sharp. I took my place quietly among the round tables as the host introduced the panelists. Brett strode on stage with his signature grin, dressed like success incarnate. He didn't notice me right away. But as the moderator asked each speaker to introduce themselves and their business background, his eyes flicked over the crowd and then landed on me. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I waited. When my name was called, I stood slowly and walked up to the stage, clipboard in hand. Hi, I'm Celeste Warner, I began. Founder and creative director of Root Thread, a boutique firm focused on protecting legacy stories. And more recently, a partial owner of the Echo Ridge project. Brett's jaw visibly clenched. I continued calmly. My work is about truth. About what families forget to record until it's too late. What they erase in the name of pride. Or hide in the name of control. The room grew still. I specialize in bringing quiet voices to the forefront because legacy isn't just a last name or a family photo. It's the people who stayed behind when no one was watching. Who rebuilt in silence. I glanced at Brett. His knuckles were white on the mic. Later, during the networking hour, reporters swarmed. They wanted to know about the partnership, the history, the drama, but I gave them only this. I'm not here because I won a battle. I'm here because I built something worth standing on. And that night, as I stepped outside and looked up at the glowing skyline, I realized something strange. I didn't need revenge anymore. Because I had something they never would piece. The lake house wasn't mine again. Not officially, at least. But it might as well have been. Brett's development stalled 6 months after the interview. Permits got tangled. Investors backed out. Rumors swirled that the land wasn't clean, that someone on the board had questioned the ethics of the rezoning. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Instead, I watched from the edges, steady and still, as the structure they'd tried to build on broken trust slowly folded in on itself. And when the deal finally collapsed quietly, without headlines, I was offered the lake house again. Not by Brett, not by my mother, but through a real estate firm, masked by legal transfers. I bought it. In full. Cash. Not to spite them, but to remind myself that some things are worth returning to on your own terms. It was late spring when I finally stepped onto the porch again. The boards creaked just the same. The pines still whispered in the same soft rhythm. But the girl who once stood there, invisible, small, waiting to be invited in, was long gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned that silence can be armor, that kindness isn't weakness, and that reclaiming what you lost sometimes begins by walking away from the people who refuse to see your worth. I brought with me only a notebook and a bottle of tea. I sat on the swing. I opened to a fresh page. And I wrote, "This time, the story starts with me."